Imagine waking up to find your town as a battleground, hotels set on fire, police in riot gear, streets blocked, and somewhere inside those buildings, real people, terrified, watching through the windows. This is not a scene from a war film. This is Britain. Right now, over 180 people arrested, 41 police officers injured, protests in Bristol, Glasgow, Liverpool, Manchester, Newcastle, and dozens more towns across the UK. And at the center of it all, a government policy that's been quietly costing taxpayers billions, and nobody told you how badly it's unraveling. So what exactly is going on? And more importantly, what happens next? For years, the UK government has been housing tens of thousands of asylum seekers in hotels across the country. Hotels that used to welcome tourists and hold weddings now locked off from the public, running 24 hours a day as temporary accommodation for people waiting for their asylum claims to be processed. It was always described as a short-term fix, a temporary measure that began during COVID and somehow never ended. But in 2025, everything boiled over. A criminal case in Essex, a high court ruling that shook Whitehall, a surge of protests from Epping to Edinburgh, and suddenly, a policy that the government had quietly hoped would fade into the background became the single most explosive issue in British politics. In this video, we're breaking down exactly what happened, who's involved, why it matters to every single person in this country, and what could happen next. Stay with us. Let's go back to the beginning. Before 2020, the UK rarely used hotels to house asylum seekers. It relied instead on private apartments and shared housing. That system, while imperfect, kept costs manageable. Then came the pandemic. With evictions paused and case processing frozen, asylum seekers were moved into empty hotels. Thousands of rooms. Overnight, the then Conservative government called it temporary, but the backlog of cases grew. The small boat crossings increased, and the hotels became permanent in everything but name. By June 2023, there were over 51,000 people housed in more than 400 hotels across the UK. The bill had hit £8 million a day, every single day. When Labour came to power in 2024, they inherited a system on the brink. They promised to end hotel use by 2029 and began reducing the number down to around 210 hotels and roughly 32,000 residents by mid-2025. But the numbers of new arrivals kept climbing. Over 111,000 people applied for asylum in the UK in just the year to June 2025, a record high. In July 2025, a spark landed on dry tinder. In Epping, Essex, just outside London, an asylum seeker who had arrived in the UK by boat only 8 days earlier was charged with sexually assaulting a 14-year-old girl. The man had been housed at the Bell Hotel in the town centre. He has since been found guilty on multiple counts of sexual assault and other offences. Local residents were furious. Protests began outside the Bell Hotel. Some were peaceful, others turned violent, and far-right groups, including Britain First, UKIP, and Patriotic Alternative, quickly moved in, using the case to organise demonstrations at hotels across the country. The protests spread to over a dozen cities. Officers were attacked. At one hotel in Islington, a 64-year-old man was arrested on suspicion of arson with intent to endanger life. In Rotherham the previous year, a man was jailed for 9 years for setting fire to a hotel while people were still inside. Then came a legal earthquake. Epping Forest District Council went to the High Court and argued that the Bell Hotel was not being used for its intended purpose. The council won. A judge ordered all asylum seekers to be removed from the property by mid-September. The Home Office said the ruling could, quote, substantially impact their ability to house asylum seekers across the country. And they were right to be worried, because within days, 13 other councils had announced they were exploring similar legal challenges. All 12 councils controlled by Reform UK said they would try to follow Epping's lead. Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch urged Tory councils to do the same wherever legally possible. If even a fraction of those challenges succeed, the government could face a genuine crisis, scrambling to house tens of thousands of people with nowhere to go. Here's the number that makes even government supporters uncomfortable. According to the National Audit Office, £1.3 billion out of an estimated £1.7 billion in just 7 months of 2024 was spent on asylum accommodation contracts, the vast majority going to hotels. The Office for Budget Responsibility has projected asylum accommodation could cost £15.3 billion over the next decade. That's up from a £4.5 billion estimate made just 6 years ago. Nigel Farage and Reform UK have made the hotels the centerpiece of their political campaign, calling for the immediate closure of all hotel accommodation and the deportation of what they claim are 600,000 illegal arrivals. The government's response has been firm but defensive. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper insists the number of hotels has been reduced by more than 70 since Labour took office. She points to a record 5,179 foreign national offenders removed in Labour's first year. But for many people watching from their towns and villages, that doesn't feel like enough, not fast enough, not visible enough, and not, frankly, convincing enough. So what does all of this actually mean for you? If you're a taxpayer, and that's most of us, you are currently funding a system that costs somewhere in the region of £6 to £8 million every single day. That's the NHS, that's social housing, that's the schools where our children sit, being squeezed while this continues. If you live in a town with one of these hotels, you know the tension firsthand, the uncertainty, the protests, the police presence that now feels permanent. Communities that were already under pressure, stretched by years of austerity and a cost of living crisis, now find themselves at the center of a national firestorm they never asked to be part of. And here's the part that often gets lost in the noise. Inside those hotels, there are real people too. Asylum seekers, many of them fleeing genuine danger, who are living in limbo, sharing rooms, unable to work, waiting for months, sometimes years, for a decision on their claim, trapped in a system that nobody, left or right, thinks is working. One asylum seeker described his experience like this: 4 people to a room, 5 beds, someone sleeping on the floor. Another said he locked himself in his room for 2 years, suffering in silence, invisible. This is the reality that headlines rarely show. Not heroes, not villains, just a system that is failing on every side. So where does this leave us? The government has a legal duty to house asylum seekers while their claims are processed. That won't change overnight, but the court ruling in Epping has cracked the dam. If councils across the country follow suit, and many are already in the process of doing exactly that, then the pressure on this government to act will become unbearable. They've promised to end hotel use by 2029, but 2029 feels a very long way away. And the streets of Britain are telling a very different story right now. The big question, the one nobody has yet answered, is this: if you remove asylum seekers from the hotels and the processing system is still years behind, where exactly do they go? Because when a system is broken at every stage, closing one door doesn't solve the problem. It just moves it somewhere else. If you found this video useful, and I think you did, hit subscribe. We cover UK news every single day. And trust me, this story is far from over. I'll see you in the next one.